there was a lot of influence politically in and around Queens. It was very corrupt, Queens.
Hmm.
If you had something to get done, you had to have contacts. Like Cataldo and I had this judge that we could do business with. We could reach him, pay the judge, get cases, not just our case, get cases thrown out, weaken the case, dismiss parts of the case, and then the prosecutors couldn't go forward. And of course, the young prosecutors, when you're in a county like that, they come on, young guys out of college, they're not very bright, so there was a lot going on, the judicial corruption. And so here I am busted, and I'm sitting in the cell. It was a rainy night that night. That's what I remember. I was all wet from being out in the rain. And once they busted me, they had me in the detective's room. And then, they processed me, they fingerprinted me, they mugged me. And then, they threw me in a cell somewhere. And I sat there all night. I want to say I think it was a Monday or Tuesday night. And then they processed me, I think the next day or so. And when I went to court a day or two later, the young prosecutor, he wasn't in charge of the case. They had an older prosecutor come along, and that guy requested $1 million bail, and the judge granted $1 million bail for a drug case. So I wasn't going anywhere. I had to go back in the holding facility and wait to see if my attorneys could get that bail reduced. Well, a couple of weeks went by and they never got it reduced. It was still $1 million. It was the summer of '84. It was election year, and everybody was high and excited about, busting guys for dealing cocaine. Maybe weeks later, as my family kept coming to visit me, I could see the torment that I had put them through. They were upstate New York, 100 miles from New York City, isolated. Yeah, they had to run the racetrack. We had 3 or 4 races each month. But after May went by, in June and July, I was up there and I was doing a lot of thinking. Am I going to continue this life? What can I do to bail out of the life? I didn't have the money. I mean, I had assets. I had put in almost $600,000 or $800,000 in that racetrack, so I figured eventually I could sell it. But we had to get through month by month, and the overhead was high. And my wife was selling all her jewelry. She had collected a bunch of jewelry over the years. Eventually, I was sitting there with a Hispanic guy. I don't remember his name. And he said his wife had come in, and my 2 sons and Ro was sitting in a visiting room waiting to get in, and the 2 kids were crying. And he explained that to me, and that bothered me. So we had the visit, and then I looked at my wife and I said, yeah, there'll be some changes going on. I had already gotten the idea that the way to beat this cocaine case was probably contact the government and tell them about my connection to the judge in that building, which was this Judge Brennan. And I mean, you could read the papers and see what was going on. Ed McDonald was a big name in organized crime as far as law enforcement. And I figured, well, if I could get to talk to him, I'll bet I would be of value to the government.
So at this point, you were thinking of just only cooperating and getting the judge in trouble.
Oh, yeah. I had no intention of testifying against anybody else about any criminals. I wasn't interested in flipping and testifying against criminals. So what I did was I called this...
Ed McDonald?
No, I called this probation officer. His name was John Lembach, and he had been my probation officer. So when I called, he was in Brooklyn, located there. He wasn't a probation officer anymore. He had gone to ATF school, became an ATF agent. So I found out when he would be in his office. I got his phone number, and I called again, and I told him, come visit me. So he came to visit me. We went down into the visiting room for attorneys, not family, and we sat at the table. And he knew my whole history, by the way. Don't forget, this was 1984, and I had a case from 1978, 79, the car case. And I talked to him and said, look, I'm about done with this life. I need to get out of this life. I need to move my family away. I know how this all works. I mean, I don't know all the detail, but if you go back and talk to Ed McDonald, you tell him that I had Judge Brennan, Cataldo, and I were able to pay him off for cases, to fix cases. The guy's face turned white.
Really?
Yeah, he couldn't believe I was telling this stuff, because he knew me from the 70s. He saw
Did he
me
ha-
when I had my my Corvette shop. He knew all my stories. He knew I was connected, friendly to Gotti and Cataldo and all these wise guys.
Did
So
he
then
know
he
that
went,
the judge was corrupt at all at this point?
oh, no, the government had
So,
notions. They
uh,
had, they had known that he was corrupt, but they couldn't get close enough to him, to start a case. I mean, they had attorneys who were given information on the judge. And that had been going on for several years, maybe back into the 70s. But no one could ever get close. So the way I heard it was he went back and sat down with McDonald. This was like August of 84. And I hadn't heard any of this stuff till months and months later. But anyway, then I had McDonald's phone number, and I used to call him and say hello, and he said, well, when you get out, we'll talk. The reason I had his number was, if I wanted to talk to my wife, I would have to call upstate New York Collect. It was some ridiculous charge for the phone call, but I would call his secretary and she would patch me through to my wife's phone number. And the government
wow.
would pay for that phone call, But just because I was in jail, I wasn't, sitting there on my butt. I mean, I had ways to get around things, Anyway, eventually we got the bail down to, like, I want to say $250,000 and $100,000 cash. Well, I had a stash on the property, but I couldn't tell anybody where that stash was. It wasn't a bunch of money. It was drugs and other stuff. But eventually my wife sold off a whole bunch of stuff. And out of the blue, one of the guys that worked for us on the racetrack, because we had, employees that would come every Saturday and Sunday. His mother was an older woman. Her name was Zelda Green. She would come up to the races and meet and visit with her son. He was living up there. He was going to marry a local girl in upstate New York. And after the races, everybody would leave. And in the late summer, Ro would sit on the deck, smoke. She was a smoker. And she was sitting there crying when the woman walked up. And the woman knew Ro. She had a son named Jeff Green. I always wished I could have talked to Jeff or his mother. I don't even know if his mother's alive. And we were short about $25,000 on $100,000 cash. We needed $100,000 cash. And the woman said to Ro, how are you? How are you doing? She knew I was busted and being held, on a high bail. So Ro said, yeah, we just can't seem to get all the money together. We scraped together, almost 70,000 and we're, short. And she says, well, how much do you need? And Rose said, probably 30,000 to get him out more. She said, well, I'm going home. She lived in Staten Island. I'm going home and talk to my husband and I'll call you tomorrow. So the woman out of the blue called Rose and said, look, I have a check for 30,000 for you.
What? Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know this woman.
Was she like a close friend or anything to Ro then?
No, the kid, her son worked for us. He was a nice guy. I treated him nice and he liked the family.
Oh.
So she gave Ro the $30,000 check. Ro called our attorney and put all the money together, called for a bail hearing, and they deposited $100,000. And I was out. It was like maybe a few days before the Labor Day of 1984.
Hey, thanks for watching this clip. This clip came from one of my interviews I did in the past. Please hit subscribe if you want to get more clips like this. Also, if you want to watch the full interview, I'll put a link in the description. Or you can hit the button on the screen to watch the full interview.